With Foxhole's next major update introducing aircraft to the game, I wanted to cover the history of naval invasions, a mechanic that was changed drastically with the release of the Naval update in late 2023. The devs showed us some concepts of how they intended naval invasions to play out, and I'm going to explain how, as Naval Invasions evolved, we didn't necessarily follow the developer's vision for them. But nonetheless, we still committed hundreds of players to the beaches. Because of course, as players, we had to optimize these tactics to make sure that these invasions were successful. The Naval Update introduced battleships, the Colonial Destroyer, the Warden submarine, and new logistic ships for naval invasions, doing away with the White Whale, a ship driven to a beach and deployed as a spawn point for naval invasions. So of course, with all these new boats, everyone wanted to reenact D-Day. There were two base ships introduced. The Longhook was used for spawning infantry, and the Bluefin for bringing vehicles and crates of supplies. The devs intended these ships to be planted off the coast during an invasion. The intention was for us to build landing craft from Longhooks, load them with infantry and tanks from the base ships to get to the beach, with fire support coming from battleships off the coast. But of course, there was a problem with that. The landing craft lacked range. We needed to use barges driving alongside the fleet so that our tanks could land as quickly as possible, and at the same time. The landing craft were also too small to fit anything bigger than a light tank, which didn't work for the late game when naval invasions were much more common. So we generally avoided using them to carry any vehicles. Other than that, for the most part, I guess we stuck to the devs' vision. At first. Battleships would clear the way for infantry to land, taking out defenses like coastal guns which automatically targeted small boats, like landing craft. However, it was immediately apparent that if landings didn't happen quick enough, our opponents would mass themselves at the beach, immediately wiping out our forces as soon as they landed.
Oh god, there's so many. Oh, this is so mean.
The process played out like this. Normally, defenses like coastal guns would have to be constantly shelled, while people spawned from the Longhook base ship, built and boarded landing craft from there. Then they would have to coordinate driving all the landing craft as a group all the way to shore, die, and then spend even more time coordinating more people to get on boats again. Those steps took a lot of time, ending in a flimsy boat that could be taken out if somebody looked at it the wrong way. Not ideal. However, it was a rare but fulfilling moment to actually secure a beachhead. As more wars passed by, a new tactic became the obvious choice. Don't use the landing craft. Because you know what wasn't flimsy? The Longhook itself. Simply ramming Longhooks into the shore became a popular method for conducting naval invasions. Large ships could completely bypass coastal guns, and so long as ships made it to shore without any leaks, they could anchor themselves right at the beach, as opposed to anchoring off the coast. Anchored ships were immune to developing leaks, and the trade-off here was that they'd be a little closer to enemy artillery positions. Additionally, battleships and Longhooks would deploy their automatic turrets while anchored, destroying enemy small ships that got too close. This method would prove to solve two major problems: deploying troops before the enemy could react, and the fragility of landing craft. Sorry, Devman. In a way, you could say that we returned to the old White Whale landing ship. It just wasn't a one-way trip. Most of the time. An invasion during War 115 really showcased the value of this tactic. 3 colonial destroyers and a Longhook attacked Conclave, An island that was essentially a mountain breaking free from the ocean, and was definitely not Iwo Jima. The Longhook performed the traditional landing sequence, but due to the enemy presence, infantry had to search for viable beaches before landing, and were frequently gunned down from above. This eventually resulted in a colonial retreat. The next day, the colonials conducted another invasion at Conclave.
Oh, did we just slam into the beach this time?
We just slammed this.
But this time, the Longhook was rammed into the beach, along with supporting siege tanks. The colonials would successfully capture the island.
The goal of this war for us is no longer to capitulate the Colonial Legion. It's to create as many f***ing orphans as possible.
Push that for pregnant, boys!
Oh my god!
Of course, this wasn't the only new Longhook tactic. We understood that you could fit an absurd number of troops on the deck of a Longhook, and that they could fire any weapon they could carry, even anti-tank weapons, which coincidentally dealt decent damage to ships. I think we can all see where this is going. By War 111, the Warden Battlehook was born. At range, colonial anti-tank options consisted of different kinds of rocket launchers, which while dealing terrifying burst damage against tanks,
Fire.
lacked the DPS that the Warden anti-tank rifle could provide against a large enough target. Soon, a few Warden Longhooks carried dozens of soldiers equipped with anti-tank rifles, broadsiding enemy ships with ease. By the next war, all ships were made more resistant to anti-tank kinetic damage. Gee, I wonder why. However, that wasn't the end of the Battlehook. Masses of RPGs and HE nades would still be flung from their decks, but more in an anti-structure role and not in a surface engagement role. But they did still occasionally take out ships this way. And even the landing craft were occasionally used as platforms for attacking enemy gunboats, or longhooks. And of course, I feel like I need to mention a certain island nation from War 110. We had massive, albeit laggy, surface engagements over in the Free State of the Fingers, a mostly cut-off peninsula which was defended by colonials with a passion not often seen in Foxhole.
Are you guys sniffing the rocket?
Battleships and slews of gunboats were always on standby to counter any attempted landings. Then Update 56 in War 112 came around. Prior to this, naval warfare was more asymmetrical than most people would have liked. Both sides had logistic ships and a unique battleship. However, the colonials had a destroyer and the wardens had a submarine. One that fired torpedoes that weren't exactly great. Many players thought that it didn't do enough damage for what it was. Now, the wardens were getting a frigate, and the colonials were getting a submarine. But crucially, torpedoes gained a new, powerful ability. Torpedoes now, in addition to explosive damage, created what were called large holes. Not the small holes that slowly leaked water into the ship. Those ones could be repaired by anyone with a hammer and some basic materials. No, large holes would unleash a torrent of water, quickly flooding a ship. On top of that, players needed to carry metal beams to the hole, one at a time, to slowly repair them. However, these repairs only worked until a certain point. Large holes could never be fully repaired while out at sea, and would continue to leak until repaired at a dry dock. Which means crewmates are going to have to bucket the water out throughout the battle, which is why we typically have some rules on boats. Number 1, always run counterclockwise. This keeps you out of people's way.
Right side is the right way to move. You move left or collie.
2, power bucket when necessary. You see, Devman intended us to repeatedly walk up to the deck to throw water out. But when time was of the essence, we did what we called power bucketing. We'd fill up buckets with water and throw them on the ground. We'd gladly waste buckets if it meant we could save the ship and stay out of people's way. But regardless, taking a large hole at sea meant that a ship couldn't be anchored, as ships with active holes can't be anchored. Striking any large ship with a torpedo was essentially a mission ender, especially if the ship in question was a longhook, as longhooks needed to anchor to make landing craft, and an unanchored longhook slammed into the shore was a death sentence, to be riddled with holes by artillery. Naval Invasions just gained another level of complexity. A strange kind of rock-paper-scissors game was formed. Battleships without a sonar were vulnerable to submarines. Submarines could be hunted down by sonar-equipped frigates and destroyers. Frigates and destroyers could typically be melted in a direct engagement with a battleship. Of course, with the right conditions, battleships could lose to smaller surface ships, and submarines could hunt down frigates and destroyers. Soon, naval invasions had to adapt to the large holes that torpedoes could create.
We need to move, we need to move, we need to move. Driver, now. We need to move forward.
What was that?
That was a torpedo. We need to move forward, we need to move forward.
How did it not hit us?
Drop everything. Mains hit, torpedo.
With landing ships and battleships having to be more careful with their escort vessels, and usually other ships were sent ahead to clear the way. Things got more complicated than they already were. Naval invasions already had to be planned thoroughly to have any chance of success. At least, most of the time. Sometimes clans like to commit longhook landing ships with no support straight into enemy beaches.
So it just goes in with no escort?
Yup.
Go!
Control the city.
It's beautiful!
As long as the time permitted it and the naval resistance was low. These were called yeet hooks. But sizable naval invasions usually needed the cooperation of multiple regiments to perform a bunch of different tasks before and during the invasion itself. Building the actual fleet for invasions is a daunting, resource-intensive task. Typically, certain regiments run dockyards and take donations and orders from other regiments to produce the ships necessary. I've seen one dry dock's Excel sheets. It's quite the operation. And supplying these ships is a whole other logistical task as well. Proper reconnaissance during the planning stages is crucial. The ideal landing zones needed to be identified, and listening kits to tap into enemy map intelligence needed to be set. Important artillery bases, defenses, and spawn points also usually needed to be identified and taken out in the days leading up to the invasion. Then naval superiority is necessary for not getting torpedoed while the landing ship is on the way to the landing zone. As a response, minefields are sometimes set up a day or more before an operation to keep the submarines out. And subs are usually sent to vital choke points to take down any incoming ships during the operation. But keeping naval invasions supplied is necessary for long operations. A longhook can spawn infantry and carry a good number of supplies. However, for longer invasions, a bluefin is necessary, as it is essentially a mobile seaport.
Just let the Lordship be first.
95 chieftain. Get it.
Dedicated ammunition barges are also necessary to keep frigates, destroyers, and battleships supplied during long engagements. Occasionally, multiple invasions would happen at once, to act as decoys for the actual invasion, where most of the resources involved would be allotted to. Frigates and destroyers are also used for smaller operations, as they can spawn infantry as well, just like a longhook, just with some added difficulty. And they don't receive the same response from an opposing force as a longhook does. Because of that last fact, sometimes they can be used to secure a beachhead ahead of the arrival of the main landing force. Of course, working out the kinks of all these moving parts meant a lot of lessons had to be learned. The hard way. Sometimes the fleet would get spotted en route to the target. Supply lines could get cut off. Miscommunication could lead tanks to land before the infantry does. The invasion could run into some bad timing and arrive just as a regiment's tank line is passing by. The longhook could cross before the battleship, filling up every slot in the server before the battleship can even cross into the region. That last point illustrates a very important step in the planning process: figuring out how to distribute your team's population. These invasions can get so big that the already massive server capacity for the Unreal Engine that Foxhole uses needs to be considered. Each region on the map allows 120 players per side to duke it out. This capacity is almost always reached during a naval invasion, typically meaning that invasions had to happen in regions without active battles ongoing. Naval invasions can involve hundreds of players on either side, making planning around this an incredibly important step. Ships typically have advisable crew sizes that help with the planning stage. Fleets normally spread out to other regions to establish naval superiority, wiping out any ships they come across and using submarines to block off any enemy large ships from entering the operation zone. This allows the fleet to save the invasion region's server slots for the actual landing forces. In War 117, the value of naval invasions was clearly shown, as a truly massive Warden invasion at the Fingers cleared the path to Reavers Pass and into colonial logistics hubs. This set the template of invade the Fingers and cross through Reavers Pass to win, as a typical Warden staple for the wars to come. I was on the receiving end of the invasion in War 117, and covered the Warden side in War 122. That campaign was comprised of no less than 6 invasion attempts. And during Wars 122 and 125, we had some massive naval battles around naval invasions in the Fingers and the Godcrofts, including one naval battle at the end of War 122, where the war was cut short to maintain the dev's update schedule, leading to players from both sides to commit all their remaining assets to massive naval battles and ambitious landings on the last day of the war. However, in War 126, Update 61 was rolled out, which was a substantial builder update that included a change that would affect the naval invasion side of the game quite significantly. First, a smaller change. Rocket artillery had a range increase, leading to a few attempts of using it to sink enemy ships. And when it came to ships shelling bases, new, more easily constructed howitzer artillery garrisons were introduced to the game. Like the old and more expensive to set up concrete howitzers, these pieces automatically retaliated against artillery, so artillery strikes needed to be much more deliberate. But a major change had to do with large holes. A previously submarine-only ability was also given to storm cannons, the largest artillery pieces in the game. This allowed storm cannons to create large holes in ships from up to a kilometer away, making naval invasions much more difficult in storm cannon covered areas. This change was made to make a super weapon truly feel super. Additionally, storm cannons would now require these same core materials, rare metals, as ships to create. Essentially, you could build a destroyer, or you could build a storm cannon. With the Wardens traditionally heavily investing in their navy, the Colonials would build many more storm cannons than the Wardens. One place in particular, the Fingers, had a big question mark on it. Could the traditional Fingers invasion still be achieved? The storm cannons were placed far inland, so battleships didn't have the range to shell them. Regardless, attempts were made. There was an attempt to land directly at the capital of the region to take it before the storm cannon could zero in on the ship. It was unsuccessful. A deeper strike was also attempted, where a landing intended to keep the Colonials distracted long enough for the Wardens to land rocket trucks to the north, which opened fire on the storm cannon, husking it. This created a 48-hour window of opportunity for the Wardens to take the region before the storm cannon could be repaired. However, a successful invasion in those 48 hours would not be achieved. The Fingers, like all storm cannon protected areas, were now no invasion zones. Although by War 127, sometimes the opportunity came for a battleship or frigate to risk it all to rush a storm cannon that was a little too close to shore. But having one side focused on naval and the other side focused on denying naval action was not ideal. The next update for War 127 would include a change to storm cannons once again. Their ability to create large holes would be retained, but a new mechanic was introduced: barrel heat. Every shot fired from a storm cannon would heat up the barrel by 5%, and once the barrel's heat reached 100%, it couldn't be fired until it cooled down by at least 5%. A fully heated barrel could be cooled down in 4 hours. A storm cannon now effectively had a fire rate of 20 shells every 4 hours. This change led to a rather cumbersome solution for the Colonials: build more storm cannons. For example, the base known as the Finger Blaster because of its storm cannon was built with 3 storm cannons now. However, this massive investment into even more storm cannons did not stop the Colonial Navy from planning another massive naval invasion. This time at the port of Rhyme, which had no Warden storm cannon coverage. Quite a lot of ships hit the ocean floor that day. Naval warfare's been a lot of fun. Here's to hoping that airborne operations can live up to the hype for some real combined arms tactics. I can't wait to airdrop, but seeing the delay for airborne, I hope that the devs are taking their time to do it right. But for now, no jump tonight. Oh, and Devman, can we please have our ladders back? I know I couldn't cover absolutely everything, but I hope that I at least did these naval invasions justice. They are my favorite part of the game.